Cool, so everyone here for the Researching Global Investors. Gonna learn how to find a few of those. All in the right place? Cool. Alright, so my name is Chris Cummings. I am a Senior Marketing Manager at LSN who puts on the conference here. This is Mike Quigley.
Hi, I'm the VP of Investor Research over at LSN. So I run the team that recruits the investors for this event and then also manages and updates our database of investor mandates where we track about 5,000 investors and kind of just try to understand an in-depth view of what it is they're looking to invest in within the private life science ecosystem.
Yeah, so just a quick question. Was anyone here at the fundraising boot camp earlier today? All right, got a couple. So some of this we'll go over, same structure, and I'm sure Dennis covered a few of those things very emphatically. Another question that I have, how many people out here are fundraising for their life science startup? So how many fundraising CEOs we got? Cool. All right. So I guess out of you guys, most of this will be trying to figure out the best ways to go out and find new investors and track people down. We'll go over a few different techniques here. So we're going to go through, literally how to go and find a new investor lead. So how to look for another lead, all of that, where to go, and literally just starting from Google even. The next one we'll go down to is how to kind of go through, once you have your list of investors and the new leads, where do you go from there? How do you figure out which investor is the best one, most likely to be a fit for your company? We'll then go down kind of how to then go through different types, which goes into how do you find the fit. And then once you figured out the investors you want to talk to, how do you actually then go and talk to them? So first step is just going to Google. There are a few ways you can go through here and try to find more accurate leads, and we'll go through a couple of those. And it might seem sort of intimidating at first, or how do you just go search through the internet? It's huge. But it's kind of where Mike and his team started 5 years ago. We didn't really have much of a start, and then we were able to kind of build out a network just by going through these methods. Mike, how long did you guys didn't start with very much, right?
No, we started from zero and we built the conference basically around a lot of this kind of research and networking methodology. And a lot of it is, using this is important. We're going to go through a couple other slides too, but it's just kind of constantly keeping your ear to the ground. And being in tune with news sources is key because there's new funds being raised constantly, new rounds being announced that kind of give you a hint of what they're looking for. Mm-hmm.
The ear to the ground is the big thing, and a lot of these searches will kind of have ways to get there. So a few of these Boolean operators, and I'll hop out in a second and do a demonstration of how to use these and how to physically go through the search. If you use quotes, that's exactly the word. So usually if it's a two-word phrase, so something like digital health or medical device, you might want to use quotes around that. So it'll pick up only articles or references that have specifically the phrase you're looking for. And both or, either or, those are pretty self-explanatory. The minus symbol is a nice kind of trick to use because if you say you want to have look for investors but not crowdfunding, let's say, because you aren't interested in crowdfunding, you can write a minus in front of that and it'll take out every investor who mentions crowdfunding in their name. So it's a good elimination tactic. And then you can use in title, file type, various other ways that you can search there. So then this is sort of just a way to look at it, but I'll kind of hop out real quick here and do an actual search. Fire this up. So let's say we do digital health. And light early stage, maybe. And invest. And there's no internet connection. Well, I thought there would be that. So you know what? Let's just go back to here.
Yeah, this is basically the same demonstration of what Chris was just showing.
Yeah.
But you can see searching in title, life science, and invest, and early stage, minus public. So with this kind of search, you're going to only pull up subjects where the article in the specific title mentions life science. The word invest is there, the word early stage is there, and it's not public companies, since everyone here is raising private rounds. And you can see we have a new angel network, a VC firm, typical article on the typical sources of funding, our newsletter, European VC, an accelerator looking to invest $35 million, and these are just like, okay, an example. I mean, this is 6 or 7 investor leads potentially from just a quick search, and then everyone else has their own kind of buzzwords that describe their space, their disease areas, their stage of development, financing round size, series, and you kind of play with all these things and do multiple different searches, and that's how you start to develop your global target list. And this is what me and my team have really been doing over the past 5 years, pretty constantly, in addition to having news feeds set up and things like that, to just kind of constantly be aware of what's happening. Because Google is a great tool, but like any good tool, you need to keep it tuned and sharpened in order to make it work kind of most effectively for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so come with like news articles, sort of news aggregators are a good place to go as well, because you can really see who just invested and maybe even setting up your Google alerts, where you can say anytime a new news article comes out about an early stage funding round over a certain amount, something like that, you could get updates on, and really knowing some of the good newsletters. I could think of Big 3 Bio, that's a good one. Like Fierce Biotech is a good one I know we use.
Fierce Biotech,
yeah.
Economy, Moby Health if you're in healthcare IT. Those are some of the top names.
Yeah, and keeping a tab on those really is a good one. So once you've kind of gone through that search, you can see the different type of investor leads that will come out. A lot of them are conferences, so there's always a conference going on. It seems that it's focused on investment, especially kind of in this sort of the year from now through the end. So you want to kind of look through them, and if you're a private company, maybe look at the type of companies that are going to a conference, then look at the type of investors who are also going there, and see if the companies match up with what you are. So if you're looking at maybe Biotech and Money, or like a big conference where it's mostly other biotech companies that have a little ticker next to them, and you are still a preclinical therapeutic company who's nowhere near an IPO, that might not be the best place for you to go and get an investor lead, because a lot of those are probably looking more towards those bigger public companies. If you find other companies who are more in your range and see those investors who are at that conference as well, those would be the better ones to add to your list to go after. Like we said, press releases, news aggregators, those are really good ways to keep your ear to the ground and know where, what's happening at any given time and know when to hit somebody. Looking at the similar company websites, that's kind of like going to what I just said with the conferences, but could be a little misleading sometimes. If just because an investor put money into a company in the same space doesn't necessarily mean they're looking to do that again. If they maybe were burned, or maybe they've already hit their quota for a certain fund for that, for your space, if you're looking, this person does tons of medical devices, then that might be okay. Whereas, they invested in another cardiac or another stent or another cancer drug, maybe that's a little too specific. So just kind of a thing to be cognizant of. You can go then look at the board of directors and see what groups they're from. That's probably a stronger way to do it. So not just look at the firm, but look at who from that firm is on the board.
Yeah, because most investors, particularly in the earlier stages, in this like Series A, B rounds, they take a board seat, kind of following investment for the fund. So by looking at similar companies' websites, backtracking, looking at their board, you can oftentimes find, oh, one of their board members is on part of F Prime Capital. It's very safe to assume that F Prime invested in the company if you can't find any news on it, and that they're also interested and at least have some knowledge in the space. So they could be a pretty good contact for you. And yeah, it's just kind of another kind of backwards thinking kind of way of getting in.
Yeah. And that's where LinkedIn does come in, very useful, because, all of these people have LinkedIn. It'll be, usually if they take that board seat, they'll then put that on their LinkedIn. So you can use LinkedIn searching pretty similar to Google. Just having used it, I think it's not quite as accurate, or you get a lot more junk with it. But it does have sort of that advanced search feature where you can click off, I'm looking for somebody who is in venture capital or in biotech. It uses that same Boolean rule search engine in their searches. And it's what people are updating themselves. So it's not, it's that self-declared information of a new investor saying, I'm at this biotech now, or I just moved firms and I used to be at a different one. And so, again, kind of, this is what the advanced search looks like. So if you have gone to a previous company webpage and are looking for a specific person, then you just type them in. If you are just using this as kind of a similar Google search, then you can actually, like I said, look at, check off VC, private equity, check off big pharma. So anyone looking in there, you can look through their job titles and kind of tier out those. Usually those will get pretty high search results, so you want to find other ways to filter through. But this is another really good option if you're just kind of going out and trying to aggregate as many potential leads as possible prior to sifting through them and finding who the best fit may be for your company. So those are kind of all the general ways we wanted to go through in order to find leads. Again, I think the kind of high points are looking at the conferences, looking at what's going on at any given time, probably in updating that line of thinking every 3 to 6 months, quarterly in that range of, okay, maybe I haven't checked up on what a given investor or what the landscape looks like in a few months. It's time to kind of get back on that track and see what's happening. So once we've gathered all the different leads, so maybe look for a few hundred different kind of investors to sort through. That would be sort of a good number to go after. You then want to go through and say, okay, how do I whittle this down and know who are my top 20, my kind of tier 1, these investors look like a great fit for what my company is. Your mids, maybe opportunistic investors who are just kind of looking for a good deal, or may or may not, it's hard to tell based on what you found. And then the long shots who you want to talk to because anything can happen, but may not be the first person you go after. So there are a few ways to kind of go through, and first you want to see if they have a fund and if they have access to that money. So, occasionally there are, iBanks or various consultants, on the consultant side probably, they'll try to say that, I am investing myself, try to take your meeting, may even want money up front to try to introduce you. That's usually a red flag. But, and I think we see this in the family office space a decent amount. I remember you saying, you know, with
Yeah,
people
I mean,
trying
you
to be
see
the
it, you
introduction.
see it a lot. It's groups that are connectors, not principal investors themselves. They oftentimes frame themselves as a funding partner, or even they like loosely use different words. You want to really be wary when you're on their websites or talking with them. Words like networks, advisors generally tends to mean that they're not the decision maker that's kind of holding on to the purse strings. Those are the people you really want to be talking to. These people can help you, but if you're out there raising money, wanting to get investor meetings, then these are something you might want to try to research on it and potentially pass on.
Yeah.
And they advertise themselves like that to get as many meetings as possible, basically. And then when you're in meetings, and kind of ways to kind of gauge is looking to see if they have portfolio companies on their website. Generally, investors are pretty, it's pretty clear that they're investors most of the time. When something kind of looks a little strange, it tends to be a little bit strange. You can check other sources also, you know, network with people that you know, see if you can find anyone else that's done business with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and like they can be useful. I think usually the more upfront somebody is, if you know they say we're an advisor or we are just trying to connect, or literally say we're an investment bank. Those are probably the more useful ones because they're not trying to pretend to be something they're not, and they're not trying to rope you in that way. I think looking through to see if they have a portfolio is another kind of good way. I think most investors will put at least some indication to their portfolio on their website. And yeah, those are again sort of the big things. And then usually you tell as you get the conversations that how legitimate they are. So the next one you want to go through, once you've identified that yes, they do indeed hold the purse strings and they are legitimate investors, is are they currently allocating, and are they specifically currently allocating into the life sciences, and then even as you get down into your area. So do they have any new investments? And that's where this ear to the ground kind of comes in. You can find out a lot of those again by having those news aggregators or the different newsletters and articles. That's one way. Usually if you just Google, if you have some investor that you want to check out, and you can just Google their name, new investment, it'll come right up. And fund vintage is another way to look at it. So I think most on their website will have vintage of the fund that they're coming out of. If it is 5 years, that's probably in the right range. If it's more than that, then even if they still have money left over, they're still working out of that fund, it may be reserved for the companies they've already invested in. So just, that's probably someone you want to bump out of your top tier investor and down into a bottom one. Are they going to conferences is another one. So maybe, the huge VCs are probably going to a lot of conferences. They're sending people out. But a lot of these sort of mid ones, if they're still actively going to a lot of these conferences, they're using their time. And that's sort of one of their bigger indicators is an investor's time. So that that's almost their currency. And so if they're spending their time going to conferences, then that means they're really looking for new deals, and it's a good time to kind of hit them.
Yeah. And I want just to stress kind of the fund vintage piece. Like Chris mentioned, this is basically the fund vintage is the year that the fund was raised and was ready to start allocating that capital. So anytime you can find news articles about a new fund that just closed, or a fund that is currently raising and maybe had its first close and is now open to another round of investment into the fund, that is really the best time, particularly for earlier stage companies, that you want to be getting in with that group. Because most funds have a return period of 5 to 10 years where they have to get that money back to LPs. So if you're an early stage company and you're not planning to exit or have an exit opportunity for them within a 3-year span, then you have to basically find them within 2 years of them having raised the fund for the investment to kind of line up with their objectives. And that's really, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, before traditional venture capital type investors. That fund vintage piece is really key in terms of understanding if they're going to be a good fit or not.
Yeah, all of that. So the last thing, press releases, kind of similar to what we've been stressing the whole time, which is really one of the key elements is staying on top of what's happening and really being active and outgoing in your investment. And so I won't harp on that too much more. But those are different ways to find out who is active in the space right now. The next thing you want to go is to see if they are actively allocating and also if they're looking at your type of company. So say you're still a preclinical therapeutic company, maybe with an Alzheimer's drug or a new immunotherapy, any of those kind of hot button things that we hear so much about. You want to make sure that the investor is looking at that type. Now, with one of those, most probably are. If you have sort of an off the beaten path, a device or some diagnostic or maybe an orphan designation, kind of one of those treatments, you want to be a bit more specific in the type of investor you're going after. So, ways you can kind of classify it in your head and how they usually go out. Sector is broad, device, diagnostic, therapeutic, healthcare IT. Subsector, you get a little more specific into maybe they only look at biologics versus small molecules. Maybe in the device world they only look at single use, or maybe an implantable, or they don't look at implantable, or they only look at a certain pathway of device. Diagnostics, maybe they only look at companion, something like that. And then, that's probably more there. Indications, what's it for? So, that's probably broad for the most part. Some people usually, I would say, exclude an indication more than only look at one. And then you can find a lot of this on investor websites. A lot are more specific than others. Again, using previous companies they've invested into is a bit of a double-edged sword, so just be careful with that. It can be a good indication, it can be misleading, so don't use that as sort of a source of truth. And then, again, go back to press releases. That's, keeping an ear to the ground. That's how you identify those. Investment size and stage, that's the next thing you have to look at. So do they look at my technology? Now do they look at, do they do deal sizes that I'm looking for? Will they do kind of those Series A, which I think the series letters can get a little blurry. More, do they do investments between 1 and 5 million, or are they only looking for bigger ones? Do they only do small investments, and do they stay away from bigger kind of bite sizes? One way to do this, I think, is the size of the fund that they have. So, in the same place where you can find the fund vintage, if they have a big fund size, they're not going to be making many small investments because that would be too many people to manage. If they have $1 billion fund, they're not going to be making a bunch of $1 million little nicks here and there. So you can find that usually on their sites or on other aggregators. Know the difference between biotech and device phases. The investor type, I think Mike's going to go into this a bit more. Some tend to look at the smaller side, so maybe on the venture philanthropy or
angel group,
yeah, someone like
earlier
that.
Stage VCs.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of with a broad brush affects what stage they're going to be investing in, but it's not a hard fast rule.
Mm-hmm.
And also one thing to note here is just because they invest in preclinical therapeutics doesn't necessarily mean they invest in in development or early clinical devices. Oftentimes we see that even preclinical therapeutic investors want to see some market traction in the device space, kind of prior to making an allocation. So kind of understanding the difference there in between how the investor evaluates the two spaces can kind of help you out in terms of separating who's going to be a really good target versus not.
Mm-hmm. And then where they invest is kind of the final thing. Because I think with your first kind of pass when you're tiering through your target list, you want to be less specific into a geographic where they invest, with the exception of maybe like municipality or government organizations. So, you know, a group, a Wisconsin like economic group probably is only gonna look at you if you're going to Wisconsin or you're in Wisconsin. But for the most part, you want to try to at least start a conversation. And maybe they know someone, or if they really like the technology, you know, I think this is probably one of the more flexible areas that you can look at. But it is sort of important that, you know, if they have a lot of offices, they're probably global. If they only have one, they are going to be a little more localized. And one thing I think you hear from a lot of investors is that they like sleeping in their own beds too. So if they, and it kind of comes back to time being their currency. If you're all the way across the world and they don't have an office or any feet on the ground in Boston or in California or wherever, you're going to have to hit a higher threshold for them to really take a look at you, just because of opportunity costs. And so, yeah, that's it with the geography side. Do you have anything to add to that, or is that no?
No, I mean, the closer you are, the better, obviously.
Yeah.
You should kind of prioritize those leads. But we have seen, particularly with investors, and I'm doing another workshop later on investors coming out of Asia looking to the US, that kind of good technology and good fit can trump that regional difference in terms of where they're looking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the
just
fit for the technology and what they're looking for is crucial. So kind of to wrap up the sort of how you get everybody and the tiering, you know, how do you know who to go after? A little case study we ran a while ago now, but so again, this is one thing we've been working on a lot, is how do you tier these and how do you gather this information? That's sort of the core of what Life Science Nation does. So we went through a list from a third party. I'm not sure if it was from another iBank or another, just a general list of contacts that a client brought us, of investors they were looking for their company. You know, they had, what, in the probably 60 or so range of leads that they were going after. 15 of those leads weren't allocating, so they didn't meet that first threshold. 14 just weren't really a fit for what their technology was. You know, they either weren't looking in that stage of development, maybe it's a therapeutic versus a device. And then, you know, about half of them were solid leads, and that was around 33 that we saw. We kind of then went through our own list, and were able to do that same kind of tiering of, you know, is it an investor looking in your bite size or your raise size and in your technology? And you know, you could add a lot more just by going through these sort of simple steps. And then there's that sort of cross-matching. So definitely a lot of ways to gather, and, you know, fundraising, it's such a numbers game, like sales, like networking, so much of life. So getting more refined, accurate leads is crucial to the race.
All right, now I can kind of walk through how we see the different investor types. And again, it's important to, I think, note as we're going through this that just like every company is different, every investment firm is different. So I'm going to provide some like general framework for how the different classes kind of think and operate. But it's important for every meeting that you go, you research them as an individual group as opposed to as, you know, a VC or as a angel, because there are differences between them all. So based on our research, the methodologies that Chris has described and what we've been doing, this is kind of how we see the lay of the land for early stage companies in the healthcare space. The majority of the capital available does come from VCs, followed by private equity. Family office is one of the fastest growing asset classes in the world. Corporate venture, angels, venture philanthropy, government orgs, large strategics, institutional alternatives, and hedge funds. So that's kind of the world you're looking at when you start to look at the private capital. VCs, which everyone seems to know, and people tend to not be the biggest fans of them, they raise funds from multiple outside parties called LPs, and this is kind of what that fund vintage I was talking about before. So they have, their job before they start talking with you is also fundraising. And that's one of the more difficult things that they have to do, and why they're so particular about the investments that they make, is because if the investment doesn't pan out, they have to be able to explain why they thought it was a good idea back to their LPs.
The best VCs are the best fundraisers.
Yeah, exactly. And because of this, like I mentioned with the fund vintages, they have tight exit time frames. And this is true across all traditional VCs unless the fund is noted as being evergreen, which basically means that profits from the fund are reinvested back in. And those tend to be more common with like venture philanthropy type groups than traditional financial investors. But for the most part, they're looking to exit. They oftentimes say 3 to 5, but really 3 or less is kind of what they really want to see for a potential exit. Initial investments of 1 to 10 million. We all see the news releases. I imagine that can range up a lot higher than that for some of the big groups like OrbiMed, F Prime, that can allocate 20, even 50 million in Series A rounds. They're purely financially motivated. Where some of the other types of groups might have a philanthropic or strategic interest, these guys are trying to make money, and they're investing basically across seed, venture, and growth stages. Private equity is kind of like the big brother to venture capital. They also raise funds from outside parties. They often use leverage and debt in their transactions. They tend to be much larger than VC funds, and they're looking later stage down the development pipeline, primarily analyzing companies on revenue growth metrics, market share, and things like that. They're really not kind of that risk capital that VCs sort of represent. Although some of them are starting to look earlier and form kind of side funds for those early stage investments. They oftentimes can have a little bit longer time frames. Initial investments can range from 5 to 100 million plus into the billions of dollars, really, with some of the really late stage leveraged private equity funds. They're also financially motivated, and they're looking kind of more in the venture, particularly in the growth and expansion phase. Oftentimes looking both for equity stakes as well as majority ownerships and kind of buyouts of companies.
So do you think, have you seen a lot of them looking at a preclinical therapeutic, or would you say it's pretty safe that most of them will go later, more close to the market device? Or
some of them are kind of creating specialized funds to do that. But for the most part, if I was an early stage company, I would not be spending a lot of time looking at my private equity investors. Oftentimes, and this kind of leads into the family offices, oftentimes the private equity folks tend to have made a lot of money in private equity, and they can be investing as individuals in your company, but through the actual fund itself, they tend to be looking later stage. That's kind of plays into the next one, family offices. These are a group that everyone kind of comes to us looking for, kind of views to them as this shining knight on the hill in terms of the capital world. And there tends to be two kind of flavors of family offices, either SFO, single family office, or multi-family office, where a single family office is basically managing the wealth of usually one individual or one family. Multi has a pool of really high net worth families. And these groups, like I said before, it's tough to categorize them. This is even more true with family offices. They can have huge variation in investment sizes. The net worth can be anywhere from 100 million to billions plus. So oftentimes they're just kind of taking their first steps into investing, putting in $50,000, $250,000, and then some of the more institutional family offices can be putting in 5 to 10 million. So really trying to get an understanding for why they're investing in life sciences, as some are kind of philanthropic in terms of they have a disease in their family, or they're strategic, they've made a lot of money in the space. I mean, most of the pharma execs of the big pharma companies have their own family office funds that are also investing in early stage companies. And that can be kind of a pseudo financial / strategic motivation. They have been gaining interest in direct transactions. Traditionally, this was a large capital pool that would invest into venture capital funds, and then those funds would manage that wealth and invest on behalf of them. But they basically got tired of paying fees, especially after the financial crisis when a lot of that money was lost, and they started going direct into companies themselves and setting up their own internal programs to do so. And they can be doing seed, venture, growth, and expansion phase of investment. They can really be doing anything. Whereas VCs, when they go and raise money, they raise it, just like you guys, when you go and raise money, you say, this is what we're going to do with the capital. We're going to spend it on these studies. VCs go and say, we're going to invest in these spaces, in this investment size. Family offices don't have that restriction, for the most part. They can basically be investing and be creative, be flexible with investment size and structure. One piece that I think is a common misconception is that VCs tend to be much harder on valuation than family offices. And while that can be true, particularly with the philanthropically motivated family offices, the ones that are financially motivated, so VCs need to move capital within a certain amount of time to get the exits back to their LPs. And because of that, they need to be making investments. Family offices also don't have that pressure to be allocated. So if they don't like your valuation, they can always just step away and wait for the next one. So sometimes they can be a little bit, some of the ones I've spoken to, they say they're sometimes even more hard on terms than VCs, just because they don't need that, basically don't need to be making investments at all. Where they can be more helpful almost unanimously than VCs, however, is in the exit time frame. So they're not going to be rushing you along to get you through milestones that you might not be the best for you strategically as a company, but it's better for them as an investment, because again, they don't have that pressure to get the money back to the LPs. So while they can be maybe a little bit, or just as terse as VCs with valuation, they can have longer time frames and holding periods.
So you mentioned that there are more family offices. Is it true in the biotech world, in spite of the risk?
What do you mean more?
Because you mentioned that there was an increase.
A growing asset class?
Yeah.
It's tough to say if there's more, because also a lot of family offices, their deals aren't announced. Because of the nature of the beast, they don't want lots of people coming to them. But I can say that in like the 5 years that I've been doing this, I've consistently been seeing new family office groups. I don't know if that's just a matter of me finally finding them or them starting to invest. But I think as some have been successful, success tends to breed success, and then that kind of builds it along.
So beyond the ex-pharma execs, they are not afraid of investing in biotech, risky biotech?
They're definitely afraid. Particularly, so there's a couple kinds of family offices too. Those with experience in the space, and they can kind of leverage that to do their diligence. Like successful entrepreneurs, pharma execs, those kinds of things. Those with a philanthropic motivation often hire folks to kind of do the diligence for them, so they'll bring in consultants or hire people full-time to be doing sourcing for them. And then kind of the pure financially motivated groups who are not experienced in the space, almost, I would say, pretty exclusively will be co-investors. So you'll already be raising from a VC or from a strategic, and then they'll help to come in to fill out the round for another, $500,000 to $2.5 million out of like a $10 million raise. Yeah. So they take kind of, comfort, because it is obviously a very risky space. They take comfort in diligence of others.
So having said that, who's the new dumb money?
Who's the new dumb money? No such thing. There's no such thing.
Family offices, other than obviously Google searches and networking.
Yep.
That's really.
So Google searches and networking, that's a big way. Law firms can be a great lead into family offices. They have been for us and other companies. Looking at donors to philanthropic foundations in your space, as well as donors to academic institutions that have high research facilities in-house. And then it's really, it's not a structured space really. So it is kind of a lot of just networking and who you know and grinding.
Ear to the ground.
Yeah.
I'll just add one thing about family office from our experience.
Yeah.
Dealing with someone who doesn't have knowledge or expertise in your space, you spend a lot of time educating.
Yep.
It can take a long time to get things. Frequently what they find is they realize, wow, we're really young in this space.
Yeah.
Probably should do this.
Exactly. And then a lot of those times, unless the person really likes you and you really hit it off with them one way or another, it's going to be tough And that's true with other investors too. When we were talking about like the backgrounds of people on the board, if they have to learn your whole space, it's one of the banes of innovation, is that they don't want to take the time to do that. They want to invest in kind of things that they know or are aware of. So definitely playing into that, just kind of tailoring your marketing to try to understand your audience's level of understanding of your space and your market need. It's going to help you in the long run.
Any more questions on the family office? Is always a hot button thing. So if you have any,
Yeah. So the next class is kind of corporate venture capital. This is a great class for early stage companies, in my opinion. They operate similar to VCs, only they're investing funds on behalf of a company. So you see a lot of the big pharma groups have these, big medical device groups. And now in the healthcare, is anyone in a healthcare IT space or no? Okay. Well, in the healthcare IT space, a lot of insurance companies and hospital systems are starting their own venture funds. And those are, the way I look at it is therapeutics has big pharma, healthcare IT kind of has these hospital and payer funds. That is going to be eventually their kind of target audience for an exit, or customers in their case. They tend to have longer timelines as well because they don't have the strict financial motivations of VCs, as well as deep pockets. They can always lean on oftentimes they can lean on the parent company to get more capital if they need. Very, very variable investment sizes. They can be strategically motivated, some, and it is a small subset. I know like Novartis Venture Fund, for example, is not strategically motivated. So they're a purely separate entity. They can leverage Novartis' resources for diligence, but they don't have a mandate to invest in strategic sectors that align with Novartis' mission. So understanding that's pretty important, although I would say the majority are strategically motivated. So that's a good place to start. They do tend to look globally, and they can be seed, venture, and growth stage. And oftentimes getting a corporate VC in around can, it really helps, especially with like family offices and less educated investors. It shows that you're kind of like the real deal. It's a great proof of concept to you, to other investors that might not be that educated in the space. If you have Biogen or GSK kind of coming into your round, it's a good stamp of approval.
I feel like on a lot of the big hit rounds you see in the news, there is one of the corporate VCs or strategic, the pharma itself,
Yeah.
as one of the co-investors or something like that.
Yep. Angels, so these are, there's kind of like a gray area between angels and family offices. Angels basically are also individual investors investing personal capital, but they just tend to be much smaller in their net worth and their size of investment than what you would call a family office. They often invest in larger groups, and I'd say that's really kind of the best way to go about trying to advertise and market to them if you're trying to raise angel capital. There's a number of different really good groups out there: Mass Medical Angels, Mid-Atlantic Bio Angels, Life Science Angels. Very easy to find with a couple of searches. The more advanced ones have pretty structured diligence processes and kind of pitch systems that you can kind of get through. I would be wary of any angel group that's going to charge you to present to the group. Those tend to be not worth it, in my opinion. Or also we've seen groups that charge to do diligence on you. So just kind of be wary that I would say that's not the norm if it's kind of your first time out there. These groups specifically do tend to focus very regionally because they're investing in such early stage companies. They want to be able to, drive over if something's really going wrong. It's a figure of speech. They can be financially or philanthropically motivated against this personal capital. It could be just something they're really interested in, they really like. They're not beholden to LPs, it's just themselves investing their own capital, so you got to kind of win them over on a personal level. And seed and venture stages generally is where they're playing. Venture philanthropy is another newer group. These are philanthropic organizations that are investing directly. You often hear the phrase like a double bottom line, investing both for profits and impact. They can do both. Traditionally, they funded primarily exclusively through research grants, and they saw, based on talking with a number of them, that those grants didn't turn anything because they kept falling into the funding gap that we all struggled through. And so they started to see, well, what can we do to help advance that even further? And they started raising, through special kind of purpose vehicles, equity investment arms. Generally what I've seen is they're making allocations anywhere from $10,000 to about $2 million. It's kind of the high end for these types of groups that I've seen. They are, again, philanthropically motivated. They can tend to look globally, and they also tend to be great resources in addition to capital. They have great access to patient advocacy groups, thought leaders, as well as the capital, and they are really mission driven, so they're kind of working on your team from the beginning and trying to help solve the problems you're trying to solve. And they're also looking kind of seed and venture stages generally, because they're really trying to make the most impact with their capital. So what they want to do is put in some capital that then lets you go raise one of the big Series A's. Get you those last couple proof of concept studies that you need to really attract a bigger investor. They want to view their capital as kind of like catalytic in terms of driving to that next change.
One thing on them too that I think in the family office way, and you can kind of ask more on this, is that there might be a theory that they are less stringent on the valuation as well. Or that they're lighter on that.
So they're oftentimes the capital is non-dilutive. They're definitely less.
If it is dilutive,
they're definitely less less focused on kind of the valuation. Yeah, I mean they're not giving money away for free, but they are they're looking for a return in a different way than the traditional financial investor would. Yeah, we're going to quickly run through this, just identifying the best contact and what to send. Generally at large firms, if you don't have a relationship or a way to get in, and you're coming in cold, you want to look, it's the tougher road, but it's what you're going to do if you don't have the relationships. Associate or principal level, they're basically the deal sourcers for the firm. You got to win them over, they present back to the partners, and if they do, if you're able to sell them enough to where they can educate the partners, you can come in for generally an in-person meeting or a call with some of the decision makers.
And they're trying to bring good companies too, so it's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you win them over, they're going to fight for you because they're trying to make their way and become a partner. Yeah.
And again, that's if you can't get a connection into one of the partners directly through the network. That's always the best way to go. But when that starts to run dry, that's your next option is kind of go through here. Keywords and job description, deal sourcing, identification, screening, that all represents the fact that they're out there looking. Backgrounds in your technology area is always important, so you don't have to spend the time educating them on what your problem is and what your solution is and why it's novel. And as always, utilize LinkedIn for common connections, because a warm intro is always better than going in cold.
Or even if in your intro email you can make some, like, I see you went there, or
Yeah.
you used to work, or you used to live, whatever, that type of little thing.
Finding contact info, websites, LinkedIn, using the Google search, to try to pull up, articles they may have written that reference their email addresses. And if that fails, just call the main line. A lot of times they have either, the automated kind of dial by name directories, or you can just get a secretary and just be honest. Hey, I'm a fundraising company. I was wondering if I could get, an email for this person, or if you could forward something along for me. We built the database in this conference through cold calling, so it does still happen. It does still work. It's not fun, but it can be effective.
Another thing too, a little trick that you can use, I think a lot of people know it, but even if you just get one email from an organization and you know the people's names, all the structures are almost always the same. I've used that trick so many times to get to biggest VC companies.
Yeah.
I've used that, so they all do that.
And it's kind of scrappy, but that's part of what being an entrepreneur is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be smart on that. There's a website called Email Format.
Yeah.
Allows you to essentially take the main name, and then that pulls up their best guess.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
people are catching on to that. Zoom Info is another way. I think they charge now, but that's if you just get one, you can go to the next one. Yeah.
So this is one piece that hopefully you can take something away too, is the initial email. What should you send? With any kind of sales outbound email, you need to answer the 3 questions right away, quickly, which is who are you, what do you want, and why do I care? So a small description of your firm, what you're looking for in terms of an investment or counseling. Oftentimes, if you ask for advice, you can end up getting some money. So that's not a bad angle, and people tend to like to help. And then why do I care should be really, you need to be able to boil down your core value differentiator into 2 or 3 sentences. Keep it brief. I mean, you're reaching out to these people cold. You don't want to be coming out with, you know, a 2-page email that you just expect them to read because they open their inbox. You got to be able to kind of hook them quicker than that. And then for the additional information, if you can get their attention with that, that's when you include the executive summary in the PowerPoint that goes a little bit more in depth. But by keeping it brief, it shows that you have a respect for their time, and you also just kind of understand them as it would be like an empathetic person reaching out, and that they're reviewing hundreds of emails a day. Most investors that are institutional get inbounds constantly. So by keeping it brief and allowing them to understand quickly if they're going to be interested or not based on that criteria we mentioned, you know, stage, sector, indication, financing round size, they're going to be more likely to want to respond than I've seen it in my own outreach, just because they know that you get it. You know what I mean? You understand what their job's like, and you're probably going to be a better person to work with, and you're going to be just more interested in speaking with you.
Yeah, and the intro email or for a conference intro partnering message it's something everyone focuses on, knows is important, but having worked with just tons of the different companies here, it's the top place people struggle, is this intro email and not sending out enough of these intro emails are the two biggest hindrances to being successful that I've seen. It's not something to underestimate. Not getting too into the weeds, it's a really fine line, but also not being too short. So practice, there are definitely sources where you can do it.
Yeah.
This is one.
And this is just a very, very vague template to kind of understand the key pieces that you need. I wouldn't say take this exactly and fill in the blanks. And the other piece that this doesn't say, because you couldn't really put it in a format, but if you're reaching out because you just saw an investment they made that was in your space, say that. If you're reaching out because you saw they studied at the same school that you did, say that. Or if any kind of personal connection that you can show that this isn't an email blast, or you're not just one of many names on the list, I actually put as much time into writing this email as I hope you spend reading my materials, that helps. And then also, I mean, generally I follow up at a pace of once a week. If I send an email and I don't hear back, I shoot a quick note, maybe a little value add, some message or some news or something. Or if not, just, hey, I want to see if you saw this, don't know if you're interested or not, please let me know.
Yeah.
And they appreciate that.
I think the 1, 2, 3 emails, we hear that a lot too. Probably not going to cut it. I mean, even for our team who talks to these people a lot, it usually takes more than a few emails. When we were at the beginning, one of our analysts made literally 26 different points of contact before they got a response. So yeah, that follow-up is key. Yeah.
You've gotten better since then.
Yeah, we had that like very early in the stage, and she was one of my friends too, so that's why I like telling the story. But yeah, there's a lot to it. So yeah, I think that.
Yeah, and then kind of after, when you're doing diligence, if you're kind of later on, check references, talk to their portfolio companies, ex-employees, talk to, if you know of investment bankers, see what they're like to work with. Just kind of have to do a little bit deeper diligence on the group. Okay. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.